Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving headfirst into a really provocative idea from neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky's book, Determined. And his argument? Well, it's simple, but it's also completely mind-bending. That feeling you have that you're in charge, that you're the captain of your own ship, he says it's a total illusion.
So let's start with something we've all done. You know that feeling, right? You see a pair of tongs and some voice in your head just goes, click 'em. You ask why, and the answer is just, you gotta. There's no grand reason, no deep purpose. It's just this random urge that pops into existence. Sapolsky uses this exact kind of simple, silly moment to kick off a massive question. Where do any of our actions really come from?
And that question brings us to his central metaphor. And you gotta stick with me here. He argues that a moment of pure, free choice would have to be a causeless cause, an action that just poofs into existence from nothing. And that, he says, is as absurd as a turtle just floating in midair with nothing holding it up. The reality, he argues, is that every choice, every action, is just resting on the turtle that came before it, in an infinite chain going all the way back. It's turtles all the way down.
So let's really get into this floating turtle problem. How do we find one? Or how do we prove they don't exist? Well, we can start by asking a question that sounds super simple, but is actually impossible to answer. Pick any behavior you just did and ask, why did that just happen?
The book basically throws down a challenge to all of us. It says, go ahead, try to follow the chain of causes backward. Let's say you chose to wear a blue shirt today. Why? Well, maybe you were feeling a certain way. Okay, but what caused that mood? Was it the weather? Maybe a dream you had last night? Fine, but what caused the dream? You see where this is going, right? You can play this game forever. Finding that first uncaused cause is, well, it's impossible.
So to really prove that this causeless cause is a myth, the book takes us on a pretty wild journey. We're going to pick a single action and trace it all the way back in time, from just 1 second before it happens, to hours, to years, to even centuries before. And this is where it gets really fascinating, because you can see how all these different influences just keep piling on top of each other. A second before you act, sure, it's about neurons firing in your brain. But hours before, the hormones in your system, your stress levels, whether you were hungry, all of that changed the entire chemical environment your brain was working in. Go back years, and your childhood literally physically wired your brain to react in certain ways. And then you go back centuries, and the culture your ancestors built is still whispering instructions to you today. And get this, for an example of how deep those whispers go. Studies have shown that people whose ancestors came from rice farming cultures, which required a ton of collective work, are more likely to just walk around an obstacle in their path. But people from individualistic, wheat farming cultures, they're more likely to move the obstacle. Even the kinds of gods our ancestors worshipped were influenced by their environment. The harsh, singular nature of the desert tended to produce monotheistic religions, while the chaotic diversity of the rainforest often led to polytheistic ones. These are ancient forces still shaping your gut reaction. And here it is. This is the final stop on our trip through time. Every single one of those factors, the hormones from this morning's coffee, the lessons from your childhood, the farming techniques of your ancestors 1,000 years ago, all of it, every last bit, converges right here. It all comes down to the physical structure and chemical state of these neurons in the split second before you act. There's no space left for some magical you to make a free choice. It's all just biology and history. Okay, so if every single thing we do is predetermined by this endless chain of causes, we have to face some really, really difficult consequences. I mean, if we're not actually in control, what on earth happens to our ideas of praise and blame, of fairness and justice? Now, there's a really common argument against this, championed by philosophers like Daniel Dennett. The idea is that, yeah, life isn't perfectly fair, but it's fair enough. He compares it to a marathon. So what if someone has a slightly better starting position? Over 26 miles, that stuff doesn't matter, because luck, good and bad, tends to average out over the long run. Everyone has a decent shot. But Sapolsky's response is, well, it's pretty brutal. He says that in the real-world marathon, luck doesn't average out. It snowballs. If you start at the back of the pack, you're the one who gets your ankles nipped by a hyena. You're the one who gets to the water station last and has to drink the dregs. And all the while, the runners at the front, who had a clear path, are telling themselves how much they've earned their lead, totally unaware that your race is just fundamentally harder than theirs. And this way of thinking leads to the world we see every day, right? We see a graduate and we congratulate her on everything she's accomplished, crediting her hard work and her talent.
Then we see the garbage collector, and we barely give him a second glance, assuming his lot in life is a result of his own choices. But we forget the most important part. If you could somehow swap everything about them, their genes, their brains, their childhoods, their ancestors, all of their turtles, they would, without question, swap places.
So that brings us to maybe the most difficult question of all. If nobody really deserves their success and nobody deserves their failure, then how in the world do we deal with people who do terrible, harmful things? Well, for pretty much all of human history, the answer has been simple. Retribution, an eye for an eye. We have this deep-seated belief that people who do bad things deserve to suffer for it. And, as Sapolsky argues, we often get a kind of dark satisfaction from seeing that punishment happen, just like this crowd in 18th century Paris. He actually calls it the joy of punishment. Sapolsky says we need to throw that whole idea out and replace it with something he calls a medical quarantine model. And the goal is incredibly simple. Just protect society from harm. Think about it. You don't hate a car because its brakes are broken. You don't want to punish the car, but you absolutely 100% take it off the road so it can't hurt anybody. The whole focus shifts from judging people to just managing risk.
And when you really fully absorb that mindset, hating another person becomes completely illogical. It makes as much sense as screaming at a tornado for destroying your house. Now, you should definitely take shelter from the tornado, and you should do everything you can to stop it from hurting people. But hating it, that's just a misunderstanding of what it is.
And look, this isn't just some philosophical fantasy. We can actually see different approaches in the real world. Just look at the numbers comparing the US justice system, which is very focused on punishment, with Norway's, which is much more about rehabilitation. Norway locks people up at 1/11th the rate of the US. But here's the kicker, the most important number. Their recidivism rate, that's the rate of people reoffending, is only a quarter of what it is in the US. It turns out, this model isn't just more humane, it actually works better. Okay, I know, a lot of this can sound really dark, maybe even a little hopeless. But Sapolsky's final and maybe most important argument is that letting go of this illusion of free will is actually one of the most freeing, most liberating things a person can do. Just think about it. It allows you to let go of the corrosive poison that is hatred. It frees you from that damaging myth that people who have it rough in life somehow deserve it, that their struggles are some kind of personal moral failure. You can just let that go. Now, is this easy? Absolutely not. Sapolsky is the first to say it's incredibly hard. He admits that 99% of the time, even he can't live this way. He still gets road rage, he still feels pride when he does something well, but he says just because something is nearly impossible doesn't mean it isn't true. The real challenge is just to keep trying.
So, in the end, the science points to one conclusion. We are incredible, magnificent, unbelievably complex biological machines. We are the result of an unbroken chain of cause and effect that goes back to the very beginning of the universe. We're not steering our own ship. The truth is, the ship never even had a captain to begin with.
And that leaves us with a final, absolutely profound question to wrestle with. If we can scientifically reason our way out of hating someone, what does that mean for the other side of the coin? What does it mean to love a person or to feel gratitude? If hating someone is like hating a tornado, what does it mean to love a lilac? How do we build a life filled with joy and meaning in a world where ultimately no one really deserves praise or blame? That's the question we're all left with.